what the heck am I supposed to put inside of this text box? We do not know. In some cases, we'd have some kind of placeholder text that would tell us what kind of content we're supposed to put inside of the text box. For example, we even have this in Visual Studio. Up here in this little search bar, we have search as the placeholder text, so we know that text box wants some kind of search content. Now, unfortunately, placeholder text in WPF text boxes is not supported by default, so in this UI component workshop, we're going to be creating a placeholder text box. And to start this off, we are going to come over to our solution and create a new project that's going to hold our custom control. It's going to be a WPF custom control library, and we're going to call this the placeholder text box control. And here we go, we got our project. Let's get rid of this comment because we already know what to do. And let's rename our control to be the placeholder text box. And then in our themes, generic.xaml, location of this file does matter. We have the default style for our placeholder text box, but we got to rename this to be the placeholder text box. And inside of this control template is what is going to be displayed on the UI for our control. We'll come back to this later. Let's head into our placeholder text box and define some dependency properties that we're going to use to configure the placeholder text box. So our placeholder text box is going to have a placeholder. So we're going to have a dependency property, a prop DP, scaffold that out, and this is going to be the placeholder property. It'll be a string, just text. The owner class is the placeholder text box, and by default, we'll just make it string.empty. And that's really all we need. But this is a text box, so we're going to need things like text, font size, maybe text alignment. I'm not sure. There's so many different text dependency properties, and that is exactly why we're not going to define those, and we're just going to inherit from text box so we get everything for free. Yeah, it would definitely be hard to not inherit from text box. So that should be all the functionality we need. Although one thing I want to add is an isEmpty property on our text box that'll tell us whether or not the text on our text box is empty. And the reason I want that is because I only want to show this placeholder if the text box is empty. So we could implement that through styles in the UI, but I want to show off how to create read-only dependency properties. So the isEmpty dependency property is going to be read-only because we're going to calculate it within the placeholder text box, and anything outside of this class is only going to be able to read that value. So for read-only dependency properties, almost the same setup. So we're going to do a prop DP snippet again, and this is for the isEmpty property. It's going to be a boolean. The owner class is our text box, and by default we can just make it true. But for a read-only dependency property, instead of using register, we have to use register read-only, and this gives us back a dependency property key. So let's change this to the dependency property key, and we'll make this the isEmpty property key. And typically for dependency property keys, these should be private. So now using this key, we can make our dependency property. So we're going to have a static read-only dependency property, the isEmpty property, and we'll use our key and get the dependency property represented by that key. We should also make the isEmpty setter private, and then for the set value method, if we look at this, there's an overload for that, and this takes a dependency property key. So we need that key in order to set the value, and we should be good to go. So the last thing we need to do is actually update our isEmpty property depending on whether or not the text is empty. So we can override on text changed, which we inherit from our text box, and we can set isEmpty to the value of checking if our text is null or empty. So just pass in the text box text, and there we go, we got this functionality. So now we're ready to use all of this on our UI, which is represented in the control template on our generic.xaml. So I'm going to start off by defining a grid here, and I want a grid because I'm going to have two controls in here. The first control is going to be our actual text box, and then the other control is going to be a text block on top of our text box that's going to contain the placeholder text. So let's get a text block in here, and the text for this is going to be a template binding to our placeholder. We should also get some padding on here, a template binding to our padding. And now we just need our text box, except we're not actually going to define a text box here. Instead, we're going to have a scroll viewer that has a name of part content host. So since we inherited from text box, we can define this template part, which is identified by its name, and the text box that we inherited from will find this control and apply all of the text box stuff to it. And the nice thing about this is that we don't have to manually put a bunch of bindings on some kind of text box in order to hook up things like padding, text alignment, borders. This is much simpler. And before testing this out, I forgot we want to toggle whether or not our placeholder is visible. And for that, we're going to set the visibility as a template binding to the isEmpty dependency property that we created. Read only, of course. But we're going to have to convert this using a Boolean to visibility converter. So if it is empty, it'll convert to visible. And if it's not empty, we got text, then we want to collapse it. So let's define some control template resources, just a Boolean to visibility converter, give it a key so we can use it, and grab that key, set it as our converter static resource. And let's try this out. So back in the demo window, first, we're going to need a reference to our control project, the placeholder text box control. And now let's use our placeholder text box, import that from our project. We'll rename this to custom, and let's hope this works. Alrighty, so not looking too hot so far. And oh, okay, there's our text box. So we just don't have a border, so it's kind of hard to find. I think we do need to define that by default. The scroll viewer does not take care of that. So we can set that up real quick. We can just template bind border brush and border thickness. Not sure if we need padding or not. We might have to play with this. And even background. We'll do background, why not? All right, so still no border. And actually, what I'm thinking is that we probably need to inherit from the default text box style so we get all the colors by default. That would make sense. So we're going to base our style on the default style for text boxes. I think this will do the trick. And there we go. That makes much more sense. So we got our text box. That works fine. The last thing we need is a placeholder, which we forgot about. So we can add a placeholder here. We'll say search, and we still get nothing. And actually, if we look at our order of controls here, we have our placeholder text block first, and then we have our text box, and that's going to render it on top. So if we set some Z index on here to just 1, we should get that text block on top. There we go. That's what we want. But now that it's on top, one issue we have is that we lose the cursor. And what we can do for that is make this not hit test visible. So we set is hit test visible to false. Then it's not going to get in the way. There we go. We got our cursor back. Doesn't look like it's respecting our padding. But if we type, then there we go, goes away. So our isEmpty dependency property is working. I guess for now we could just hard code some more padding. So we'll do like 5.2, but maybe you'd want to consider having some kind of converter that would take the template binding padding and add a little bit onto it. So that's a little bit more dynamic, but this should do the job for now. There we go. That looks good. It doesn't look like it's vertically aligned in the center. Let's do that. So center it. There we go. That's much better. Another thing I want to do that I completely forgot about is I want this text to be faded a little bit so that it's clearly not the actual input. So we can set the opacity to maybe 0.5. And there we go. That looks much better. And then lastly, I feel like I should move our placeholder inside of the border. So let's do that. And if we want to do that, we're going to have to surround all of this with a grid. And we can remove the outer grid. And there we go. Looks good. Now there's all kinds of things we need to consider. So what about font size? That's probably an important one. Let's make it bigger and see what happens. So okay, that does get automatically applied to our placeholder. That's great. What if I make the height really big, like 100? It's not really big, but it's more. And okay, that's an issue. So our placeholder should not have vertical alignment center by default. Let's get rid of that. There we go. That's good. But now if I set vertical content alignment to center, there we go. That's the issue. So what we want to do is set our text block placeholder vertical alignment as a template binding to vertical content alignment. There we go. That's what we want. And we should also do the same thing for horizontal alignment. Template bind to horizontal content alignment. Although horizontal content alignment looks really weird, so probably wouldn't do that anyways. But last thing, we got some extra time, so let's create a converter that'll take our padding template binding and add 3 to the left. 3 seems like the magic number there. So let's add a converters folder. We'll call this the add left padding converter. It's a very specific name, but that is what we want. We'll implement I value converter, import that, implement the interface. We do not need to convert back here. This is a one-way binding. So let's make some assertions here. First, we want to check if our value that we're trying to convert is a padding. So padding is a thickness. So we'll do a type check here. If it is a thickness, import that. We'll put it into a variable called padding. But if it is not a thickness, then we're just going to return the value. Next up, I do want to have a parameter for this converter, and that's going to be the amount that we want to pad to the left. So we can parse this parameter to a double with a double try parse. Take the parameter, and we need a string here, so we'll just use toString, and that'll output the amount that we want to pad to the left. But if this parse fails, then we can't do the conversion. We'll just return the value. But if we got through those assertions, we'll take our padding, and the left padding, and we'll add the amount, so a plus equals, and then just return our new updated padding. All right, cool stuff. Let's go ahead and use this converter, the add left padding converter, give it a key. So now on our placeholder, we are going to template bind to our padding, but let's use our converter, the add left padding converter, and this is going to have a parameter. The sweet spot that we discovered was 3. So 3 more padding to the left should give us what we want. And there we go, that looks good. So let's try and change that padding. Let's make it about 8 to the left and right now, and see if it still looks good with the +3. And there we go, perfect. So all good, we got our placeholder text box. This is pretty customizable, so we can change font size, all kinds of alignment things. I think even changing things like backgrounds, maybe red, and then even foregrounds. We'll try white. There we go, that still looks good. So I might even consider publishing this one as a NuGet package. I think it's pretty reusable. I could see myself using it. But just to review, we created a custom placeholder text box, just inheriting from text box, so we get all the basic functionality. But we now have a placeholder that we can take, which is going to be displayed if our text is empty. So we have this is empty dependency property, read only. So demonstrated how to do that using a dependency property key. Pretty powerful stuff. And then we defined our custom control template, which we get set up for free using this template part. And then we have our placeholder that we made sure to put on top. It aligns well with our content, including padding, and we hide the placeholder if we have text. So not only did I demonstrate how to create a placeholder text box, but hopefully you learned some valuable concepts along the way that you can apply to your own WPF applications and custom controls. If you have any questions, criticisms, or concerns, be sure to leave them below in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video or are enjoying the channel, consider becoming a member. Other than that, leave a like or subscribe for more. Thank you.